I'm the Director, University of Toronto Entrepreneurship, or UTE. I describe UTE as the connective tissue or the glue for all of the incredible entrepreneurial programming that happens across the University of Toronto's 3 campuses. We have 12 different campus accelerators at the university, and I'm joined today by Bonnie from UTE and Christina from the Center for Research and Innovation Support, or CRIS, who will be assisting with running the session today. On behalf of UTE, our Innovations and Partnerships Office, IPO, and the CRIS team, I would like to welcome you all to our session in the IP Matters series focused on the chemical AI revolution. As you see from the names on this slide, we have an incredible lineup of experts who are here to talk to you today on this topic. I'd like to personally thank them for sharing their time and wisdom with the group, and you'll get an opportunity to meet them very shortly. We would like to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to participate and perceive all that is presented today. So should you need to turn on live captions, please go to your meeting controls under More Options and turn on or off live captioning. To start, even for our virtual events, before we begin, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Some additional housekeeping items for these events. Please, a reminder for those of you that are just joining, mute your audio and turn off your video to ensure a smooth session and to accommodate those who have limited bandwidth. A reminder to everyone that today's session is being recorded. However, to encourage candor amongst the panelists and the audience Q&A portion of this session will not be recorded. So after the moderated discussion, we'll stop recording, and that's when the fireside chat, Chatham House Rule Q&A session will begin. A link to the recorded portion will be sent out after the session. And we will today hear talks from each panelist, then have a moderated panel discussion, which will be followed by audience Q&A. And so a reminder one more time, please mute your audio if you're just coming onto the call. Before I hand things over to our moderator, I wanted to highlight 4 really quick opportunities for any of our innovators, entrepreneurs, inventors, researchers who are on this call, who hear the topic today and want to find out how to get further involved. The first is just to plug into one of those 12 campus accelerators that I talked about. On the screen, you see U of T's Engines of Innovation. So these are those 12 accelerators in different faculties, divisions across the tri-campus. There's more information that will be dropped into the chat that will take you directly to where you find out more about these engines of innovation. Next slide, and a reminder, please mute your audio. This is really exciting. So the picture on this slide is of the new Schwartz-Reisman Innovation Campus, which is a tower on the St. George downtown campus, 14 stories, home not only to U of T entrepreneurship, 2 of our campus accelerators, our Innovations and Partnerships Office, also the Vector Institute for AI, and many other key players in the innovation ecosystem. This is also where we have OnRamp. OnRamp is both a physical co-working space for the university's entrepreneurs and also a community membership for those that want to be surrounded by like-minded inventors, founders, etc. There's information on how to become an OnRamp member on our website, which has just been added to the chat. Next slide. Coming up very soon, the week of March 4th, is Entrepreneurship Week, which is U of T's annual celebration of all things startup and innovation. Many of the events will be held in that Schwartz-Reisman Tower, as well as across the tri-campus. There are over 15 events. I would draw everyone's attention to True Blue Impact Day, which is on March the 7th, and will feature our largest pitch competition at the University of Toronto, where we'll give away over $100,000 in non-dilutive funding. A keynote address from U of T alumni Alan and Eva Lau. Alan, many of you will know, exited Wattpad, the company that he helped to build, and now he and Eva, who are engineering alum, run Two Small Fish Ventures, which is an early stage venture capital or VC firm. And finally, True Blue Expo, which is 40 or 50 of U of T's most cutting edge startups where you can interact and talk to them and see what they're building in that space. So hopefully we'll get to see many of you face to face during Entrepreneurship Week. And then finally, and most relevant to today's topic, U of T, entrepreneurship, our IPO have worked to develop IP education resources. Our IP education program is divided into 2 levels. If I can have the next slide, perfect. 2 levels. Level 1 requires no background in intellectual property. It's a 2-hour self-paced, self-guided course. Modules are online, and if you complete it and you're a U of T student, it gets recognized on your co-curricular record. And then level 2 is a deeper dive into patent strategy, as well as how to interact with the university's tech transfer office or innovations and partnerships office. Also self-guided, self-paced online modules. Encourage you, if you are interested in learning more about some of the topics that you hear about today, definitely take a look at level 2. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator. Tamara O'Connell is an IP lawyer and patent agent. As a patent portfolio manager at U of T, she works with university researchers to develop and protect their intellectual property. Tamara has a background in electrical and computer engineering and works on innovative technologies across a variety of sectors. A huge thank you to Tamara for being with us today, and I'll now pass it over to you to get us started.
Great, thank you, John, and welcome everyone. So, this is an important and exciting topic. The convergence of chemistry and AI has had a lot of recent activity, including here at the University of Toronto and with our own Acceleration Consortium. That's a research and innovation consortium focused on AI-driven materials and molecule discovery and is led by U of T professor Alain Asperou-Gouzik. So before we dive into the panel discussion, we'll be hearing some opening remarks from Alain. And please, to the audience, submit your questions in the chat as we go, and we'll address them as we're able at the end. So with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce Alain. Alain's research lies in the interface of computer science with chemistry and physics. He integrates robotics, machine learning, and quantum chemistry to develop self-driving laboratories, accelerating rates of scientific discovery. Alain develops quantum computer algorithms and has pioneered quantum algorithms for the simulation of matter. Alain is a professor of chemistry and computer science at the University of Toronto, a faculty member at the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence, and director of the Acceleration Consortium, a University of Toronto-based strategic initiative that aims to gather researchers from industry, government, and academia around topics related to the labs of the future. Alain was previously a full professor at Harvard University, where he started his career in 2006. He is currently the Canada 150 Research Chair in Theoretical Chemistry, CFAR AI Chair at the Vector Institute, and co-founder of Zapata AI and Cabotics, 2 early-stage ventures in quantum computing and self-driving laboratories. So we're thrilled to have him here with us today. Over to you, Alain.
Thank you, Tamara. So I have 10 minutes, and I think I'm gonna just tell you a little bit about the trajectory of the Acceleration Consortium, but also about, I guess, innovation in general, and a little bit about what I think about chemical IP at the very end in these 10 minutes. Okay, just to seed something for the panelists to continue in their discussion. So yes, I've been in Toronto for 5 years, and I've been before then I was at Harvard, and I'm going to start with that. When I was growing up in my academic career there was a big epicenter of activity in biotech in Boston, and one of the reasons I think this biotech activity happened is because Stuart Schreiber and many others decided to found the Broad Institute, which was a Harvard MIT. It's a Harvard MIT institute that created a lot of biotech research that eventually started the virtuous cycle of other organizations, like, for example, Flagship Ventures starting to be created, and then Flagship in turn created Moderna, which in turn created the vaccines, and so on, right? So coming from that environment to here, I noticed obviously we have a parallel track a little bit with AI, right? We have AI here, we have the AI pioneers, and I am an advisor to Radical Ventures, which it's a very big fund that actually invests in AI here. And there's a lot of AI companies here that we can talk about, like Cohere. And of course, also good activity in quantum computing, for example, with companies like Xanadu, right? So it is a parallel, but I wanted to be more ambitious. And even when I landed, I said, I want to do in Toronto what the Broad Institute did in Boston, and make Toronto the capital of the topic that I care about, that I will talk about today. What is Acceleration Consortium, right? So what is that topic? So at the time I was moving here, I participated in this. Basically, we wrote a blueprint that became one of the 7 missions under the Paris Agreement called Mission Innovation. And the blueprint at the time was called Materials Acceleration Platforms. Now they're called Self-Driving Labs. They're basically equivalent terms. The idea is to use AI and automation, which are 2 drivers of the 21st century economy, for science, right? And at the time, AI for science was not as popular as you think it is right now, and also automation for science. It's kind of technology from the 90s. It was not really put together with AI. So when we and others groups, we're one of the pioneers, but other groups around the world started thinking about this concept of a closed loop discovery engine built by AI, I thought it was a good ambition to try to make Toronto the capital for that in the world, and try to build around it the same kind of virtuous cycle that happened in Boston, right? Well, thanks to Stuart, which was my former colleague, just doing that, right? Just have to sit down and do it. So the first step that happened is that the university was gracious to give us one of the strategic initiatives, and we were a strategic initiative of the university. We still are funded at that level, and we started working on building what we like to think about as an industrial consortium around this, right? So companies come in and then give us some money to try to create pre-competitive research, and then use that pre-competitive research to accelerate this idea of self-driving laboratories. It is around that time that the competition for the Canada First Research Excellence Fund came out, CFREF. Canada First is not as macabre or terrible as America First. America First obviously is almost a fascist statement. And Canada First, what really means is we should have Canada be first in particular topics, right, of science. And I'm lucky enough that even though I fled America First, I moved here for Canada First, which is the idea of, okay, one of the topics that the government decided to choose to fund is here at the University of Toronto, also at the Acceleration Consortium, with the largest grant ever given by the Canadian government to an academic institution, which is really cool. So now we have a lot of responsibility because we just got 200 million Canadian to spend over 7 years. But couple points about that. I will start getting into the IP issues as well. But the first point is obviously about that is that we don't want to just sit down and train postdocs and students. We want to make sure this becomes something like the Broad Institute, right? But we made a deliberate name. Notice that we don't call it an institute, we call it a consortium. And the reason is that, like the topics that were just addressed by John, we believe that small companies like startups and big companies like global companies should participate, and it's not just an academic exercise. That's what this is called, a consortium. So what are we doing with that money? We're creating like a kind of dedicated project, a moonshot project. If you watch Oppenheimer and think about the Manhattan Project, think about a Manhattan Project for good. We have 30 staff scientists concentrated on building, 6 self-driving labs here and 1 in Vancouver, in UBC, ranging from inorganic materials all the way down to biological organoids. Faculty are organized around this. And we don't spend too much money. We do have some grants, but we don't spend too much money just spreading butter like the Canadian kind of tradition, which is not very good, of taking money and just spreading it around just to feel good, right? We're focusing the money on making this project, again, have some deliverables, build the self-driving labs, and then make them help us spin out companies. And this is where my bio is outdated because I'm a co-founder of 4 startups, okay? One of them I don't list very much because it was acqui-hired before we were funded, but it's still going. It's called QLux now. It was called Calculario before. Then Zapata Computing and Keborex in Boston. Zapata Computing, I have to brag because just yesterday we changed the shareholder agreements, and in February 13, all the transaction happens. We become a public company, so that's a good story. And then we co-founded here, and Derek Newton is in the call, and other people in IPO helped us. Together with Christine Allen, we co-founded a company called Intrepid Labs, which is an AI for drug formulation company, which starts talking into this topic, right? This first company that we're talking about is perhaps the first company that came out of the Acceleration Consortium, is the idea of using AI and automation to actually accelerate a process in pharma that we don't talk too much about, which is formulation, right? Hugo is going to tell us today about the discovery aspect of it. But down the line in the pharmaceutical discovery pipeline, there is a concept of how to make a pill or an injection or any other form of delivery, for example, a suspension. And that we have shown with research, again in collaboration with Christine Allen, which is now the CEO of the company, as well as a professor, that we can accelerate and not only that, improve the composition of this and the specificity and the bioavailability of these drugs by using artificial intelligence. So we want to combine this strength in Toronto, which is artificial intelligence, with material science to really create this AI4 in Canada. Last thing I will say, because I think I have 1 minute left, is chemical IP. We do have challenges. We have a slow patent process, here. We need to be improved. Sorry, the people here in the office are here. I think the University of Toronto should have a goal of reducing the time it takes for faculty to interact to patents, right? So AC is very concerned about that. And we now have a dedicated person in IPO. Hopefully that will help. But in general, compared to my previous institution, we really had to really quickly work on the IP that comes out of the labs, right? That's still very slow, right? We also need to have, okay, we have 12 incubators. That's fantastic. We need to start building larger companies, right? So we need to attract more venture capital, right? And also chemical IP is a complicated IP. Of course, it has concepts of composition of matter, it's very complex to actually build these patents, right? So we need to have more lawyers actually around the university to make this happen. So I will just seat the panel with the challenges that I see. I see a lot of opportunity, but I see a lot of catch-up and challenges that we need to, together as a community, address so that all the IP that the Acceleration Consortium is generating becomes many companies, right? And on that, I'm going to leave the panelists to discuss.
Thank you, Alain. Yeah, it's very inspiring to hear about your goal of making Toronto a capital of self-driving labs and this kind of work. And yeah, happy to hear that we've seen some of those results already with some of your additional companies. So great to hear about those successes. So yeah, I mean, I think that segues pretty well. You touched on some of the challenges. But to continue the discussion onto what kind of IP protections might be appropriate to help achieve some of these goals, or maybe there's a conflict with some of these goals. Curious to hear about what some of our panelists think about that. So we'll move on now to the panel discussion. So really thrilled to introduce our three fantastic panelists. We have Patricia Folkins with us here today. She's a partner with Erskine & Parr LLP, where she leads the firm's chemical and chemical AI practice groups. Patricia's practice focuses on assessing the patentability of new technologies, preparing and prosecuting patent applications worldwide, providing strategic advice, performing prior art and freedom to operate searches, and portfolio management, including for due diligence purposes. Her work experience is in most areas of chemistry, with a specialty in organic chemistry, in particular in small molecule therapeutics. She also has experience in the areas of agriculture, food chemistry, formulations, catalysts, polymers, materials, nanotech, and drug delivery. Patricia works with all types of clients, including small startups, universities, research hospitals, and multinational companies, and previously worked in-house as a medicinal chemist and as a patent manager for a small biopharmaceutical company and a leading Canadian university. Rishika Dheer is a partner with Erskine & Parr LLP as well, where she leads the firm's fintech and chemical AI practice groups. She is an electrical engineer and an intellectual property lawyer, as well as a registered patent agent before the Canadian IP Office. She's also a registered US patent agent and represents Canadian companies and entrepreneurs before the US Patent and Trademark Office. Rishika has over a decade of experience in drafting and prosecuting patent applications across a wide range of technologies. She has helped many clients protect their valuable technologies in fields such as telecommunications, signal processing, medical devices, power electronics, payment processing, wearables, cybersecurity, blockchain, data encryption, AI, computer networks, mobile applications, and robotics. And last but not least, Hugo Bojorquez. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Physics with a minor in Math. And before joining FIDC, a leading research, before joining FIDC, a leading research center in Bogota, Colombia. As the longest lasting member and founder of the biophysics group, Hugo and his team pioneered the study of amino acids with quantum mechanics. His interest in machine learning began around 2000, focusing on developing self-organizing maps for predicting receptor ligand IC50 for the MHC2 complex. During Hugo's PhD at Dalhousie University, Axel D. Beck, renowned for his work in density functional theory, served as Hugo's committee member, influencing his work on non-covalent interactions and the structural basis of peptide systems from quantum mechanics. In 2021, Hugo joined the drug discovery group at the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research, developing a quantum-based pipeline for virtual screening. Hugo is a co-founder of QXL, a spin-off of the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research. QXL uses innovative quantum computing and machine learning-based technology to screen protein-ligand interactions with higher speed and accuracy for drug discovery projects. So with that, we've heard there's lots of exciting development in this field, and I think maybe to kick off the discussion, we can start off with an example of the science to give a little bit of context to the IP details that we'll be discussing today, and maybe start with you, Hugo. If you could share with us some of the work that you're doing at QXL, sort of the technology that you're integrated into the drug discovery, and where sort of the chemistry and AI concepts sort of interact.
Thank you. Okay, what can I share about our technology? Basically, we want to innovate the drug discovery arena for one very simple reason. Most of the computational approaches are based on molecular mechanics, classical mechanics, Newtonian mechanics. And I developed in the institution you mentioned at FIDIC, we developed a pipeline for doing receptor ligand interactions at quantum level. Initially, that was very expensive, but over the years, we save a lot of time doing fast and almost linear computations on this system. So we published several papers where, as a note for the discussion, all these papers are, and the pipeline that we developed for FIDIC is open, is in GitHub. So people can access and see how it works and if it fits their needs. So with that background, I joined the YCR over 2 years ago to develop new IP. And this is so interesting to me, this panel discussion, because the idea was they have this project where they want to partner with a company that is one of the partners of the QAxel initiative. They are leaders here in Toronto on new compute technologies that basically they are inspired in quantum computation, but they run on GPUs. So essentially it's very fast technology, but it basically uses the same input files that you can use in a quantum computer. So we developed the platform for leveraging this kind of technology. The company is called Cogniframe. So there are basically two products in our platform that I want to highlight. One is that product with them. We call it QDoc because essentially it's based on a docking algorithm, but actually it's now a design platform for drug discovery. And the other one, at the other end, we use something we call QBind, which is very fast quantum computing, quantum mechanical, energies for dissociation of potency estimations. So essentially, we have like both ends of the spectrum, so very quick compute and very accurate precision physics.
And so, I mean, it sounds like there's kind of a, there's a development pipeline there, right? And, in terms of, calling this kind of a platform for drug discovery with your CogniFrame example, it seems like there's potentially a lot of data that's being collected at various points along the way. Can you maybe speak to that, what the importance of that, various types of data is, how you protect it, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, that question has to be more with the other partner company, with OICR. OICR has more than 15 years of development in drug discovery for cancer research, of course. And they have a lot of data information, like binding affinities for specific targets. And that's proprietary and is very well protected. So we can use those things to test and validate our technology internally. So we have been working basically under the radar for these 2 years because we want to test and validate against those data before. Obviously, that data is not publicly accessible. The only way it comes out is in the results of our tests and benchmarks. But eventually, and this is something I proposed to the Institute at one point, maybe we can leverage that, developing new IP using machine learning, because in that way, we can also secure the original data and share a model, for instance. That's one of the initiatives that we want to do. But at the moment, the most critical data is the cancer research. They have thousands and thousands of experiments that we rely on. They have crystal structures that are not made public. So there is a lot of key elements for our development that they have and they don't share. So essentially, in this case, the strategy is a secret trade. Basically, we operate on a secret trade for several of the developments in the data. There is another set of machine learning data that we create, for instance, on the fly when creating one of these virtual screening campaigns. This data is from, for instance, from public databases, and we can use it for creating new models. And those are really not that important to be protected because it's like an intermediary path in our platform. The final results, and probably this is the most important, and Alan mentioned something about it. The goal is to create new IP in the form of molecules, because these molecules can be valued in the billions of dollars. Once you have like a hit for a cancer target, for instance, the OICR has in the past negotiated molecules valued in the billions of Canadian dollars. So that's obviously those have to be protected by a strong patent and similar things. So it depends on the phase you pick up which protection you will gonna use. That's what I can share.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, before we dig into the protection of, maybe some downstream molecules, I'd like to hear from Ruchika, from a legal perspective in terms of some of the types of data that we're hearing Hugo discuss. Some of it, can remain confidential as a trade secret. Others is, public, and maybe it's, a company or researcher's own data that ends up getting published, whether that's, on GitHub, as Hugo alluded to, or in a publication. So can you sort of comment on what the various options are for protecting these different kinds of data as an IP asset?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tamara, and thanks everyone for having me here today. So I think, you can hear from Hugo's story. It's pretty evident that data is the most coveted resource in the modern world. It's, for some companies, depending on what stage they're at, it may be the most pivotal asset that they possess, that they need to figure out how to protect and potentially commercialize if possible. And with data and IP, it's a very interesting interconnection. So the question you asked me, I'll touch on that in a second, which is about, hey, we have generated our own data. We have proprietary data. How do we make sure that that data ensures our competitive advantage? How do we go about protecting it? And of course, if there's a company out there that's working to obtain data from patients or actual humans, I mean, you probably already know the level of provincial and federal laws that kind of complicate that process because you need consent, there are privacy concerns, the approval processes can be complicated. So if you're sitting on that kind of data, it's, the question is very valid of how do we protect it. But there's a flip side to that as well, which is for companies that don't have their own proprietary data and they're relying on third-party databases or publicly available data, there is a IP concern that they need to turn their minds to, because who actually owns the data that you're using, it could be questionable. The company or the website that you're obtaining the data from may not even be the true owners of that data. And then whether you have the right permissions or not to obtain that data is another common question from an IP perspective that comes up. So to answer your question on how do you go about protecting data, under the bucket of IP, there are a few options. One option is copyright. It is pretty well established in Canadian copyright law that data itself, which is often analogized to be facts or observations, that itself cannot be protected because you can't stop third parties from generating their own data and can't freeze out the competition that way. But the case law, the way things have evolved, it kind of indicates that if you have spent some intellectual effort or skill and judgment in curating data, processing that data and presenting it in a manner that's not mechanical, that's a little creative, then you may have some copyright in the compilation of that data. And so the test is original compilation, and what original means is often debated in courts because you do have to show that you didn't just put the data together and presented it in an ascending order or chronological order. There has to be a little bit more in how the data is presented. And a great sort of example of this we saw last month when New York Times sued OpenAI and Microsoft. So in December, New York Times basically alleged that OpenAI and Microsoft were using New York Times publicly available data from their websites to train the ChatGPT and the Copilot AI models, and using that data, all the content, sound bites, videos, articles on New York Times website, using all of that as training data. And they basically allege that they own copyright in that data, and these companies to be using that data without permission is infringing New York Times copyright in that data. Obviously, this case is going to be it's going to be an interesting one to watch out to see what the courts hold in terms of who really owns the copyright and whether it is a copyright infringement in copying data to train artificial intelligence or machine learning models or not. But it kind of goes on to show that there is some level of copyright protection that extends to data. But as I was mentioning before, the test is so uncertain that sole reliance on copyright is not enough. So what we find for clients, they commonly use what Hugo clearly also kind of highlighted is the trade secret model. And trade secret model, as the name suggests, is basically you are keeping your data a secret, and that's your way of realizing the commercial value in that data. The test, though, for trade secret and what trade secret protection really means is it's a little more than just keeping your data secret. Companies need to take active steps to protect that data, and they need to treat it as confidential data and actually implement security measures. It could be encryption, could be something else to make an effort to keep that data secret. Just pure inaction or passive action may not be enough to qualify that data for trade secrets. Now, this strategy has pros and cons. I mean, pros, of course, that you are able to get immediate competitive advantage because now you're not sharing your data with the rest of the world. But the cons would be this data is vulnerable to leakage, to getting out there. And also it doesn't protect you from third parties creating their own similar data points. You can't say, hey, I have trade secret protections. Nobody else can use that data. It just means you can't be the source of that data for third parties, but they are free to go and generate their own data. So that would be a trade secret bucket. And then another commonly used mechanism would be contractual agreements. So data rights and data licenses in agreements is a common way to exchange data, to collaborate with third parties, and to work together to use that data to develop new molecules or new inventions. Of course, in agreements and licenses as well, companies need to be mindful of confidentiality obligations, limitations on how that data can be used and what fields it can be used. And if data is being modified, then kind of talking through each other about who owns the modification or the derived data. So, it's quite not as straightforward as saying, oh, we have a license in place, kind of have a lot of terms and clauses to kind of talk through. And then the last bucket that comes to mind would be patents. Now, patents, of course, they don't protect the underlying data, of course, but they can be used to protect your data indirectly. So if there is any unique ways in which the data is being obtained, or the way it's being pre-processed, or if your data, your compilation that you've created is being stored in a creative way, or there's a novel way of encrypting that data, you could go at that data indirectly from the patent lens as well.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you for highlighting sort of the 3/4 buckets, I guess, under data protection. So we heard about copyright, trade secrets, contractual agreements, and this sort of indirect route to protect them through patenting. So, we're hearing that data is a really important asset. But, that's sort of one part of this larger overall development pipeline, or sort of maybe a broader technology as a whole. And so there are all sorts of different stages, right, in the context of what we're talking about, in terms of using an AI platform that can maybe validate, what you're seeing in the data in silico. You move from in silico to bench work. Maybe eventually you end up with a new molecule itself, that, Hugo pointed out. So can you sort of follow on with sort of a highlight of what kind of IP can be protected at those different stages, and maybe we can dive into it a bit. And we'd certainly like to hear your take on the common misconception that you cannot patent AI or algorithms. And so curious to hear your thoughts on that, Rashika.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And I can spend hours talking about whether or not software is patentable. But let's sort of go back to the basics. We've talked about data. Data is a huge asset. But as you correctly pointed out, in that whole pipeline, there are many sort of places where innovation could be happening, and there could be intangible assets that are generated that could be protected using patents. So in sort of traditional chemistry, life sciences patents, they've often focused on the protecting the compound, or a mixture that contains 2 or more compounds, or a method of preparing that compound or that mixture, or in fact methods of using the compound, which also includes new uses of already existing compounds. So those are traditionally things that we're able to get patents on. Of course, there are in the patent literature, patent legislation, and through case law, there are exclusions. And depending on what jurisdiction you are exploring, that may vary. So generally speaking, for Canada, any laws of nature or naturally occurring phenomena cannot be patented. We also have an exclusion in Canada for methods of medical treatment because they're viewed as more of a professional judgment. And so they cannot be patented because they're not necessarily repeatable methodologies. Higher life forms are also excluded for patentability. So we've known all that for some time now. But now we're adding this very interesting layer of AI and machine learning to the to the pipeline, to the process. And if you abstract out the machine learning process at a very high level, what you have going on is these machines are not necessarily coded based on certain rules as they traditionally were. They are learning through experience. So the more data you feed into, the more good quality data you feed into these machines, the machine learning models, neural networks are going to identify patterns, and they're going to learn from that experience. So we've got in that pipeline, we've got right at the beginning, potentially patentable area would be if there's something creative going on with how that training data itself is being acquired. That is, so I've seen a lot of patents on that. So an example, again, a very, I guess, interesting example would be what happened to Apple Watches last month, where if you followed the news, Apple had to pull its Series 6 to Series 11 watches off the shelves because the watch had a blood oxygen monitor, a sensor in it, which would measure biometrics from the customers who were wearing the watches. But there was another company called Massimo Corporation that came forth and said, we own the patent on this oximeter, and Apple is infringing that patent. And they went through the Trade Commission, U.S. Trade Commissioner, which basically held that, yes, there is patent infringement here. Of course, this case is going to go through multiple levels of appeal, and then we'll see ultimately who comes out to be victorious. But the point is that having these unique variables or technologies to obtain data itself could be patentable. There's another very interesting example that I can cite would be, on monitoring patients' keystrokes on a keyboard and using that to see if there is a neurodegenerative order or a disease, or maybe the patient is prone to Parkinson's or something like that. Like those analyses are oftentimes, you would see them in the patent literature as protected as well. So again, how that data is obtained, the initial training data, that's a great place to see if you have something competitive that's going on, if your company is adding certain advantages that nobody else is able to realize in how you're obtaining that data, you may want to explore that further for patent protection. The next stage typically would be, pre-processing of the collected data. So if there is any novel and inventive algorithms that you're using in how you are translating the raw data into training data, those algorithms can be protected as well, and oftentimes are. And then if you look at the machine learning model itself, if so the fundamental neural networks, et cetera, those themselves are being improved. And I have to say the patents on this, like we saw a lot of patents in the last 10 to 15 years on this topic. Lately, though, it seems like a lot of off-the-shelf machine learning tools are being used because it's just easier and they're well constructed for companies to use. But if there is any innovation in that field and how you shrink the neural networks, or how Google has a patent on how to prevent overspilling of these neural networks, or if you're improving the layers and the nodes and their interactivity, any innovation that goes on there, those themselves could be patentable. And then obviously the output itself. So molecules, we've heard Hugo mention that, you've mentioned that, those are great candidates for patentability. And sometimes outputs are not just molecules in these AI machine learning pipelines. Like the output could be a unique design that's spewed out that for a the perfect car or most aerodynamic car or something. I mean, those themselves can be patented as well. And there may be something innovative in the whole process from start to finish that's worth exploring as well. So there are many, many potential patentable features that may exist. And I know there's a question. So just before I wait to take that up, I guess the other question you asked me, Tamara, about whether or not software can be patented. So there's no case law and no piece of legislation that says that software cannot be patented. What is not patented is the actual lines of code. But if you look at the US patent data over the last few years, I mean, 63 to 70% of the patents relate to software. That's just a natural sort of development that we're seeing when it comes to inventions. Also, what's not patented is anything that's abstract or anything that the patent office thinks is a mere automation of a process that people have been doing for many years using human mind or pen and paper or something like that. Automation itself is not patented. But if you can prove and in your patent application include evidence of the fact that you are solving a technical problem and your solution, your algorithm has real world implications, and those real world implications or hardware integrations could be on the input side of how the data is collected or on the output side of the output being a robotic arm moving and controlling something. All of those things can make your ability to get a patent really strong. There are many patent offices imposing limits, and they're pushing back on sort of the floodgates that were opened with software patents in the initial days, because sort of early 2000s or so, a lot of people started to get patents for automation and using machines as a tool in a very normal, basic way. And the patent offices were allowing a lot of those patents, but they have since become very careful on what they let in. And you do have to show a certain level of creativity and sort of proof that there is a technical value, commercial value to your inventions for you to be able to secure patents. So I'll stop there maybe, and then I don't know if we're picking up questions now or later, up to you.
Great, Rishika. Yeah, so I think we'll leave the Q&A till the back half. So if our attendees want to just keep note of the questions, and we'll return to you sort of closer to the end, so that all of the panelists have an opportunity to get through some of the initial material. That would be great. And so, that's a great overview, Rishika, very comprehensive. Thank you. In terms of this, larger process from the data input, pre-processing, processing into the output. I'd like to turn to some of the chemistry and hear from Patricia. So, Patricia, if we're at this output stage, and Rishika gave other examples, but I think one of particular note here would be a new discovery of a new molecule. Can you comment on the, supporting data that would be relevant for that kind of, a patent filing to a new molecule? And is it different in this context, if it was discovered through one of these AI-driven techniques as opposed to maybe more traditional chemistry?
Sure, I can address that for sure. And thanks, Tamara, for inviting us and having us here, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. So yeah, if your output is a new molecule that is predicted to have activity in a specific model for treating a disease, I mean, basically you're going to be, that's why Rishika and I work together. She can deal with the patenting of the AI model and everything that goes into it, but the output and the chemistry, really, it comes down to drafting a patent application like I would for any other small molecule or any other chemical material that comes out of it. You need to support the enablement and the inventiveness, or the non-obviousness, if you will, of this molecule with the data that you have obtained, however you have obtained it. So those are just two of the main criteria for patentability that the patent offices will look for. So you've got sufficiency of disclosure of enablement. It's enablement in Canada and the United States, or written description is also there in the United States, and sufficiency of disclosure in Europe. You need to meet those requirements in order to get your patent on your small molecule. Plus, you also have to show that it's non-obvious, so and novel, and so that in Europe they actually inventive step, in order to show that your molecule has inventive step, you do have to show that the molecule does have a technical effect. So that kind of speaks to enablement, but so you need data. So where you get that data? Well, you can now, in our world with opening chemical AI, your data can come from your predictive models. That these molecules should bind to this particular protein's active site based upon the AI-generated molecule of that active site and the binding and screening of all of these molecules. You have that data. Is that enough to support the patentability of your molecule? I think the general consensus right now, from what I've seen out there, is not likely. It would be highly recommended for you to actually go to the lab. You've got your lead, you've got your predicted molecules that should be active in this to treat this condition or to bind to this receptor or inhibit this protein. You should highly recommend it to go to the lab and actually verify those results, follow through, and that prediction is correct. I don't think in silico or AI data it is sufficient, not on its own, to support the patentability requirements that are set out by the Patent Office. I think as it becomes more credible, I mean, the whole logic and what the Patent Office is looking for is credible data. So from a credible model that predicts activity in the area that you're claiming. So as they become more credible and more reliable, maybe as years go on, this data will be treated with a little bit more, I guess, deference, if you will. But right now, it's good to have both. What you can use your data for, though, I think would be a good start. You've got your lead. You can maybe support an early filing based on this prediction. And then, as most of you know, in the patent world, you do your initial filing, and then you can collect more data and hopefully get into the lab and get some actual in vitro or in vivo data to support that prediction and add that to the application before the regular filing. You could also, though, be helpful. You could use it to kind of help support and broaden an enablement for the scope of your entire claim. So you can have some data for a few molecules and show that, well, the model was right and it predicted it. And the model also predicts enablement and inventive technical effect across all of these other molecules. So it may help support broadening the scope of your patent as well. So that's how this data might also be useful in supporting your small molecule application.
That's great. And Patricia, you kind of alluded to this at the start when you mentioned, the collaboration in how you and Rashika work together on some of these files. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on how you and the team deal with this kind of merging, so to speak, of the two different fields? Traditionally, I guess we'd see a standalone filing to an AI model, a standalone to a new small molecule. Do the current developments kind of present different approaches or strategies to those patent filings, or is this just you pick and choose what you want from it and proceed in that way? Can you comment a little bit on that?
I guess it depends on how much you're going to use that data to support the eventual claims and what you're going to claim. If you're going to use your data obtained from your AI model to support enablement or inventiveness, then you're going to need to put that data in your application. So you're going to have to talk about the model and how that data was generated. How did you train the machine? All of that information is going to have to be in there because you're teaching a person that works in your area how to make and use that invention. So you need all of that information in there. So that's where, when I've had these invention disclosures, like from the University of Toronto, where there was this component of small molecules or even larger molecules that wanted to protect, but they were, at least the original initial lead was generated through AI, and we wanted to use that to support the initial claim, but also to broaden it out. And then that's where I brought Rashika in. And then the decision kind of had to be made about how much, whether you wanted to also claim the model. And then so how much you need to put in to support a claim to the actual to the model. And Rashika can certainly speak about that if anybody has any questions about that. But that's where sort of we merge, and then the two of us have to work on the application together to create a final product. I can also see it merging, though, in another example where if your invention is actually a method of medical treatment, which yes, Rishika mentioned they're not necessarily patentable in Canada, but we do claim them as uses here in Canada. So like a use of a molecule to treat a disease. But where that use, the inventive feature is that it's we've shown that this drug should be used to treat a certain patient population. Like, so whether or not, so in order to identify that patient population, you can use an AI trained AI trained model in order to analyze data. So you've trained it to, with all of the data that correlates these values with a risk for having this disease, and so that you're going to test people and put their experimental results or their their biological assay, whatever, into the model, and it's going to spew out whether or not that patient may benefit from treatment with this molecule under these conditions. So in that way, you can see the claim being a method of treating this disease, a subject having this disease, where the subject has been identified by having A, B, and C characteristics, and those characteristics are identified using machine learning. So, which is a very common thing from my understanding to use AI for, is sort of, monitoring a patient for susceptibility to a certain condition. So I can see, obviously that's a main part of the claim, is the identification of the patient population being done through AI. So that to me is like an even more merging of the two technologies, since it's a critical part to the claim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, lots of opportunities, it sounds like, from an IP protection perspective. I'd like to bring Hugo back into the conversation to comment on the commercial perspective here. There are a lot of instances where a newer company or researcher has more limited resources to work with, right? Like, this is just a practical reality. All of these various IP protection strategies that we're hearing from Rishika and Patricia, can't necessarily pursue all of them, right? So, interesting to hear from you, Hugo, about how a business makes a decision about how to prioritize what to protect, and maybe if you could speak to QAxle's IP protection strategy to the extent that you're able, when and how decisions are made in terms of what to patent. You mentioned certain data and whatnot is kept as a trade secret, and certainly interested in hearing how this would be informed or is intended to align with the business model, right? Because it's not really operating in a vacuum, I'm assuming. So I would love to hear more from you, Hugo, on that.
Oh yeah, that's a very important question. Basically, we have to develop a strategy. That's talking to the lawyers and also with our commercialization company. We have to come up with some strategy that works for the business model that we plan to pursue. So essentially, there are like and so at the end is a mixture of decisions. So one of them is protect certain key elements on the innovation. So for instance, we're going for a patent in one of our technologies because patents are not cheap. That's the problem. And you have to consider the industry, the pharmaceutical industry is not local. So you have to patent in multiple countries. So you have to multiply the patent lawyers' fees for those countries you want to impact. And so you have to make a budget. The other part that is relevant regarding this is the business model. So some people in this sphere want to exploit, for instance, a service or just a software. So that's one way. That's not the way we want to pursue. So we want to more develop projects with clients, and therefore down the line we want to protect molecules. And usually in a company like this one that we're starting, typically if you compare, for instance, with Schrödinger, who started as a software company, now they are a biotech. They develop their own IP and their own molecules, and they have also laboratories. We can leverage OICR's expertise on drug discovery already, and we can subcontract a lot of the experiments. And down the line, essentially, the biggest value will going to be in new molecules for specific targets. So it's a combination. There is no one solution fits to every needs of protection, but essentially you have to get a down to like the company constitution. You have to write down what you want to pursue in the market and therefore operate from there. In that regard, obviously, we're just starting. So we're starting several of these requests. We'll re-advance a lot of the discussions with the lawyers. And that's why, for instance, for the technology, one part we're going to be secret for a long while. Other, it belongs to the public domain. We don't want to claim anything there. And other part is being patented. So I believe it's just a mixture of things. Regarding AI and data in particular, it's a more difficult question because, for instance, in this field, if you came up with the molecule, really doesn't matter how do you get it, as far as you can claim the property, right? So you can use whatever you want. You can use multiple instances of different available commercial software. Like that's the traditional way. So our group at WISE here use commercial software. And none of these programs, including Schrödinger, can claim anything on the molecules we discovered with their tools. So that's key to know as well. And I think it's transferable to the AI tools as well. If we discover something using an AI tool, they cannot have a claim on that. Unlike other problematic AI solutions, like for instance the text produced with the New York Times Magazine via ChatGPT. I think there is litigation there, but in the sphere of molecules, the molecular chemical space is so big that it's almost infinite. So you cannot claim on that. But it's a good question. For instance, we use a database from Enamine, which is a company that make molecules they by request, right? But they have already, like, let's so to speak, like a stock of molecules, 4 billion molecules. So if one of those molecules actually cures certain form of cancer, do they have any copyright on that? I believe no. They are just a company with a database. They don't know what these molecules work for, and that's their client's duty. So that's essentially how I can mention our IP strategy. Basically, it's a combination.
Yeah, no, it's great to get that practical perspective, Hugo. So I'm going to shift the topic a little bit before heading over to the Q&A, and I think this will be a good segue into some of the questions that we're starting to see come through, because we've been hearing about all these various forms of IP protection, what's legally available, and then what's, to sort of Hugo's comments, what's more sort of practical in terms of from the business perspective. And so, the question I think on a lot of people's minds is, how do we balance these various forms of IP protection with a goal of open science, right? And so, there might be a situation in which there's a goal of having open science, particularly in early stages of technological development, right? For example, the discovery platform itself, and there might be an emphasis on trying to advance that fundamental research and really push the field forward in a way that may not be possible if there's various protectionist IP measures in place, right? And so the question arises, well, how do we balance that and those goals with also potentially wanting to have IP protection and exclusivity on, for example, a small molecule downstream? And the goals might be very different at that stage, right? To actually pursue commercialization and make a business out of this. And to Alain's earlier remarks in terms of making Toronto a real destination for that kind of work and business. So I'll put this to Patricia, and then hear what she has to say, and then maybe we can turn to the Q&A. But Patricia, can you comment on this? I mean, this is a huge question, right? Comment on how this balance might be struck, what kind of risks might present themselves, in terms of trying to pursue exclusivity down the road if you've made something open at the start.
Yeah. Yeah, ask the IP lawyer this.
Unbiased answer, I'm sure.
Yeah, see, I actually had to do some research. I read this big, I think it's a 100-page report from the European Commission on open science and intellectual property rights, how they can better interact, state of the art and reflections. It was an interesting read, actually. I learned a lot as I went through it. It's a complex question, I think, really is what I got from it. I don't have the answers, I have to say. It's a balance between the need to protect and the need to disseminate knowledge. And I certainly see both sides 100%. In an ideal world, I wish everything was open, and I wish, that everybody had, everything was accessible to everybody and equally, but we all know that's just not the way we are, unfortunately, right at the moment. So we live within the paradigms that we have. The quote that I saw in terms of balancing, and I don't think it provides any answers, but it's the quote I kept reading: as open as possible, as closed as necessary, is the way to sort of think about it. According to the report, and it's talking about supporting sort of open research versus IPR, intellectual property rights. There's surprisingly little data, according to this report, supporting, whether or not open science is the way to go to promote innovation versus intellectual property rights to support innovation. Probably a little bit more data out there supporting that the stronger intellectual property rights actually does produce more innovation, in particular in the biomedical sciences. So I have to caveat that it really does vary from sector to sector. But more studies are needed, is kind of what they concluded. The report does highlight the importance of basic research leading to applied research. And I certainly agree with that and see that. Two examples that they provided were PCR and CRISPR. Both technologies came out of basic research, people looking at microorganisms and their genetics and seeing sort of common sequences and investigating what they do. All came from basic research, led to 2 Nobel Prizes in each one of them, but also led to innovations that were highly patented and highly protected. PCR being the older one, it's been out there for a while. I did see some studies sort of looking at whether or not all of this IP protection around PCR inhibited innovation. And I think this one study I saw, they compared sort of citations of regarding PCR, which was obviously protected using patents and enforced and licensed and stuff, versus similar techniques that weren't patented, they were open. And there was really no difference in sort of the citations for those. So they used that as a measure of sort of the influence and the dissemination of that information. I guess speaking to what you can do as an IP owner, I mean, Roche had the rights to PCR, and they did make PCR freely available to all academic. They actually didn't go after anybody that wasn't selling the reagents or selling the machines to perform the PCR. Anybody doing the research with it, they didn't go after for patent infringement, and maybe that helped with the dissemination of PCR. Now, of course, all the patents have expired and everybody's sort of free to do PCR. CRISPR is a new one. It's just more recent, so it remains to be seen sort of the effect of patenting in that area and the dissemination and the innovation around CRISPR. But currently the Broad Institute is one of the patent owners, and they are, again, not enforcing their patent rights against academic researchers and people that are just doing the research for not-for-profit. So that's one thing. I think an important thing to also think about in terms of intellectual property rights and making them available to the public in great need is COVID-19 pandemic, and how we're all familiar with the COVID pledges and how there were so many examples of companies making their technology available to anybody to, we needed those people who had access to produce the reagents or the vaccines or the testing or the PPE to get that out there, you know, that was made available under those circumstances for the global good. I don't think the pandemic would have ended without the sharing of that technology and the ability. And I have to point out, countries do, in most countries of the world, have laws that do allow them, under circumstance for the greater good of the public, to use patented technologies to the benefit of the whole. So most countries, including Canada and the United States, have laws that do allow the government to do that, so to get that information out there when needed. So I think, to go back to your question, though, about drug discovery and open science, I think, as I mentioned earlier, intellectual property rights are very important in biomedical sciences. I don't want to get into debate whether it's right or wrong, but if you do want your technology, a new drug, a new molecule, a new medical use to get out there, you do need to be able to protect it in order to get it out there to the public. For a company to pick it up and invest the time and the money it takes to get that product to the market, they will require that companies do need to be able to recoup their investment. And the way to do that is to have a certain amount of time during which they have a monopoly and they can stop other people from making, using, and selling their technology. The patent right, just to remind everybody, is a bargain. I mean, in exchange for that limited time monopoly, if you will, you have to actually disclose your invention in the form of the patent application. So there is public disclosure now. Of course, there is a certain amount of time, obviously, where people can't use it, but it's there for people to work on and perhaps innovate and improve on it, since it is available to the public. But in the example where maybe open science was used to generate a lead, I've seen that actually happen with some of my clients, where open science was used to generate a lead, and it was out there for everybody to work on. I guess when it comes to the point when there's a lead optimization that occurs, and the scientists, you know, will make modifications to that molecule to improve its activity or improve its bioavailability or whatnot. And when you do start getting to the point where that molecule or the molecules that you're making and the changes that you are making are leading to candidates that might potentially get to the clinic or might lead to a viable drug, that would be when you would definitely want to stop being open with the results of those studies, in order to reserve your right to get intellectual property protection in the form of a patent on those molecules.
Great, thank you for that, Patricia. Lots of good food for thought. Yeah, I appreciate you ending with kind of a practical example when you know, you might want to consider pivoting. So I think that's a great point to pause on and sort of switch over to a question and answer session. So there have been a number of questions coming in through the chat.